What's up everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got Michael Chandler talking about a lightweight title shot, Eddie Hearn on the UFC Jake Paul drama, and much more. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to see more videos just like this. Now let's get into it. Michael Chandler might be closer to a title shot than you think. Despite his back-to-back losses in the cage, the two opponents are actually set to meet each other at UFC 274 later this year for the lightweight title. For his part, Chandler believes that he's still in the mix for a potential title shot if he gets a few breaks along the way. At the moment, the UFC is working on getting a fight done between him and Tony Ferguson. In a recent interview, you get the sense that Chandler believes he's closer to the title shot than one might think. Case in point, this is what he said recently on the DC and RC ESPN show.
I think everybody wants to see a rematch of myself and Charles Oliveira. They definitely want to see a rematch. Chapter 2 of the fight of the year against myself and Justin Gaethje. So I've kind of put myself in a unique position where I could be one win away and I get the nod to go out there and win the title by the end of 2022.
Chandler does make a lot of sense here. Of course, he would have to beat Tony Ferguson, and it would certainly help if he finished him. Chandler has had epic fights with both the champion, Charles Oliveira, and the challenger, Justin Gaethje, including one Fight of the Year candidate. So there is a world where the UFC could make this happen if things fall into place. But what do you think? Do you agree that Michael Chandler is a little bit closer to the title than you think? Or do you disagree? Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic for the title makes a lot of sense, and DC explains why. Where the UFC heavyweight division goes from here is anyone's guess, but if you ask Daniel Cormier, there's really only one thing that makes sense. In a nutshell, this is what DC had to say while on the DC and RC ESPN show.
Him and Jon Jones, that was a fight people were pining for whenever Jon Jones was the champion and Stipe was the champion. So now you make that for the interim title fight, and you also allow for people to see whether or not Jon Jones can compete at 265 pounds.
He's not wrong. Jon Jones is a massive star, and his absence from the sport over the past 2 years has served to only bolster his fight profile since he wants to move to heavyweight. Obviously, an arrest in September nearly dashed those plans, but those charges were later dropped. Still, Jones is out there, training at Fight Ready in Arizona, preparing for his opportunity with the big boys. Miocic, meanwhile, hasn't fought since last March when he dropped the title to Francis Ngannou. He's still considered the consensus greatest heavyweight of all time, and many believe as such he deserved a rematch for the title. DC goes on to say that any fight involving Bones should be for a title, given his stature as a longtime light heavyweight champion. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see what happens here. What do you think about DC saying that Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic for the interim heavyweight title is what should take place? Boxing promoter Eddie Hearn says that Jake Paul, while good for boxing, is a quote, disaster for the UFC. The Jake Paul drama with UFC President Dana White is well documented and has included a lot of trash talk and even a whole diss track released to YouTube that has garnered millions of views. Paul, a YouTuber turned boxer with an undefeated 5-0 record, has been at odds with White over a litany of things, but mainly fighter pay and the treatment of fighters at large. The diss track, released last weekend, has only served to poke more holes in the Dana White bubble concerning fighter pay, along with an ongoing contract dispute with the UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou. This is why well-known boxing promoter Eddie Hearn says that Jake Paul is a disaster for the UFC, saying this will eventually spill over to some kind of potential action, whatever that looks like. This is what he said about the situation while on the MMA Hour this week.
There'll be more pressure on the organisation as time goes by to adjust that, especially with the voice and noise of someone like Jake Paul. Jake Paul's a disaster for those guys. Do you know what I mean?
Do you think he's sincere about this?
Yeah, but I also think he's got to be in his bonnet and he's having fun with it, and I think he's on a mission.
Hearn also discussed Jake Paul's role in boxing and said he was a good force in the sport, given the new audience he's bringing to boxing. But what do you make of Eddie Hearn's comments here concerning the UFC and Jake Paul? Real quick, don't forget to take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on the latest fight news. Strickland says he's finally able to say what he wants. Strickland has been in headlines as of late, as the MMA media warms up to the California native and the number 7 ranked UFC middleweight. He's just days away from meeting Jack Hermansson in the middle of the octagon at UFC Fight Night 200 this weekend. He's an outspoken fighter who has made some seemingly controversial statements in the past. So this week, during his Media Day press conference, Strickland was asked about the reason he's coming out of his shell a little more. And this is what he said.
I'm getting to a point where I could say and not get cut from the UFC, you know? So before it's like, oh man, I wasn't good. Like I couldn't say because Dana White would be like, hey, go that white trash motherfucker. Get him out of here. But now, since I'm getting a little bit more like, fan base, people want to watch me fight, I can say a lot more offensive, so it's nice.
Sean Strickland is on a 5-fight winning streak, including a unanimous decision win against Uriah Hall last July. Meanwhile, Jack Hermansson is coming off a big win over Edmund Shabazian last May. What's your prediction for this fight? Who you got? Let us know in the comments below.
You have a prediction about this fight? I know you're still way out. Last time, I believe you predicted a first-round TKO. Do you see it going any differently with Vargas?
It's definitely going to be a first-round finish. I can't see him lasting any more than 5 minutes for me, to be honest. Even though he's got good heart, he's got a good chin, he's resolute. But I showcased me striking in the last fight. I might have to showcase me grappling in this one. I'm going the first-round submission or first-round TKO off ground and pound.
Miesha Tate moves down to flyweight with the goal of a showdown with Valentina Shevchenko. Throughout her career, Miesha Tate has fought almost exclusively at bantamweight, 135 pounds. That was mostly because it was the only real weight class that was around at the time. Don't forget, Miesha Tate is an OG. She's been fighting since 2007 in Strikeforce. For years, there was really only ever a women's bantamweight division. And by the time the UFC started the women's flyweight and strawweight divisions, Tate was too wrapped up in the title mix at bantamweight and in a heated rivalry with Ronda Rousey to make any meaningful attempt to move down in weight. But Tate is now planning to push for a flyweight fight with the UFC. And while she doesn't look at this as child's play, she does feel she'll have a certain degree of advantages going in. Case in point, this is what she told Ariel Helwani when the topic was brought up in a recent interview.
I think that I could actually have some physical advantages in that weight class that I rarely have at 135. I don't feel like there's a strength discrepancy at 135, but I could only imagine fighting women that are built to be 10 pounds smaller could lend itself to really showing my greatness as opposed to fighting these Goliaths.
It's a pretty smart move to go down in weight and use any advantage that she could physically have to get to the top of the division. It's also a good time to do it as well, as champion Valentina Shevchenko is low on legit contenders for her title. Although in her last outing she did lose to Ketlen Vieira, the UFC may still give Tate a few fights in the flyweight division, and if she does well there, she could even contend for the belt sooner rather than later. This could be the start of a whole new chapter in Tate's illustrious career, starting her flyweight journey. What do you think? Are you excited to see Miesha Tate move down and challenge in the flyweight division? And do you think if she ever met Valentina Shevchenko in a fight, she would beat her? Let us know in the comments. Thanks so much for joining us today and catching up on all things MMA. What do you make of what's going on in the fight world? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all the latest fight news.